Hi everyone, I hope you got the popcorn with you because we are going to speak about the DevSecOps, right? And it's quite exciting topic. My name is Victoria. I'm the security architect in the Microsoft. So at the day I'm helping the customers to land securely in Azure Cloud and not to mess up with the application development. So at the other time I'm working with the DevSecOps and doing a lot of some small researches and some other development fun. And today I'm going to talk about the measuring DevSecOps and to be honest, why it's quite important to measure the DevSecOps. In the way how I have structured the talk is just to go through the DevSecOps to be sure that all of us are on the same page when we speak about the DevSecOps, and to ensure that we still say DevSecOps, not SecDevOps or any other names. Then we will look what are the metrics and why, at the first place, why we need to build the metrics and what exactly we need to measure and how should we. And I hope you will find something useful from that. And with that, let me begin with the question, just to wake up you after the good lunch. How many of you are familiar with the concept of DevSecOps? Good. If you can stay with the hands, and how many of you have implemented DevSecOps? I will keep eyes on you. Still last question. How many of you have implemented that what you consider successfully? Yes, and this is what we're going to talk about. And the first, the first question is like, what is a DevSecOps? I mean, seriously, 15 years in the DevOps, but still we are trying to hire DevOps engineers. So that's why I want to be quite clear on my personal, maybe sometimes even opinionated view that, to be honest, I don't like the word DevSecOps because it's again, security is incorporated in something and may end up being visible as a DevSecOps engineer. And I have seen that as well. It's like, okay, let's hire the DevSecOps engineer. He will come into the room and unicorns are going to happen and the security will fly, so to say, right? So for me, the better terminology is the security in DevOps. Because if you think about the DevOps, and that's not new concept, right? By the way, I hope, again, so how many of you are doing DevOps? And how many of you have DevOps engineers in the team? Yeah, okay. When you work with the DevOps, you already know that the DevOps is as well not only about the speed, agility, and that things, right? It is as well about the quality. And if we speak about the security, what is the security in the first place? It is as well quality of your product, right? And that's one of the reasons why I believe that maybe it's better terminology if we could call it like just security in the DevOps, or if we speak about the DevOps, we think about the security inside of that. But unfortunately, this is what we have as today. We always need to give the special name. We always need to build some specific frameworks because they look great and we want to use frameworks. On all of my previous talks, like offline, online, I was talking about the problem of finding the definition of DevSecOps. But of course, as industry gets developing, finally Gartner came out with their own definition of what is a DevSecOps. And I find it quite okayish. It's like, yeah, we talk about the integration of the security into the emerging agile IT and DevOps development as seamlessly and as transparently as possible. Oh, I read that, I should admit. The problem what I find with this definition is it talks again about the technology, right? If you read that, you start to think about the tools, about the processes, but you don't think about the people, and this is where we sometimes fail when it comes to the security. sometimes it was positive term. In my perspective, the DevSecOps is all about like working with the people. It, on the first place, educating the team and sharing the responsibility of the security, and then on the second place, implementing the tools for the detecting security issues in the code during the development and during the testing phase. Okay, so the question is like, at the end of the day, why we want to do DevSecOps? What are the reasons? Just because it's a new, nice, I don't know, new hype, or because it looks cool, or because at one day just security department came in and said like, okay, we will build everything from scratch and we will do DevSecOps. No, maybe for some teams it is the reasoning as well, but obviously there are several reasons. Like the first, we want to have the improved security posture and reduced risks. We have seen during these 2 days of the conference the tendency and a lot of the talks about the security breaches. And if you look on what caused those security breaches, some of them is like on the last session, people who were listening about the Bluetooth hacking, they saw like, you know, because developers are just implementing and hard coding the passwords and the PIN inside of the code, right? Or the same SolarWinds and you name it, other type of vulnerabilities. And at the same time, while we do the DevOps, while we develop in agile way, we want security to be more modern, right? We don't want to deal with the security at the end of the development cycle. So we end up in waiting queue. It's like, oh, you know, you want to go to the production today? No, you should wait 2 weeks because we need to do the pen test. That doesn't work in today's world. And again, it's interesting fact. Once you start to implement the security in development cycle, at the beginning, you will see increased cost immediately because of the buying the tools, because of the detecting all the findings which were hidden for many years and trying to fix them. But over the time, that line gets more like, you know, stable, and you realize that it actually, the proper security practices will reduce the operational and the development costs. And of course, with that, you get improved customer experience, as that may sound weird, but actually the customer loves when you deliver the quality product. And then, like, you know, when you read the updates, you're always like, okay, there's another security bug, fix it, another security. It gives us some kind of the sense of that the development team cares about the customer's data and such. So let me put this in one cycle. When we look in DevSecOps, like I mentioned, there are plenty of the practices. I will not deep dive into that. We can talk about that separately, and I do have the talks specifically deep diving in what is DevSecOps and what are the processes and the tools you need to implement. But in nutshell, if you look on the DevSecOps, it's not about the implementing of dependency management scanning tools in your CI/CD pipeline. It's not only that. This is like what I have seen, one of the first things where usually teams start. And then the second thing is the static code analysis. These are the two most common things. But there are a lot of other initiatives or the processes what you need to implement, and they follow as your development lifecycle. So what you do, and you must probably have heard that saying, shifting security to the left. So that means that you take not physically, sometimes physically security folks and put them in your team, but as well, you start to incorporate the security practices from the first day when you decide that there is a new functionality what we need to develop in our application, and you start with the threat modeling, and then you proceed as well with introducing the security tools, like I mentioned, with dependency management and static code analysis in your CI/CD pipelines. And of course, then later in that, all other things like as well, scanning the same infrastructure as a code. If you are deploying, especially if you are deploying into the cloud, that's a common thing. Then you're using, I don't know, Terraform, Bicep, CloudFormation, depends what cloud provider you're using. So it's really like short tour on the DevSecOps, but getting back to the word, like, okay, yeah, I have implemented the dependency management. We are doing the static code analysis, and even we managed to convince our developers to do the threat modeling. I think we are doing good, like, you know, on the DevSecOps. But let me ask you the few questions, like if you if you think that you are doing the DevSecOps, so why still you need to measure? And there are like several questions, like first of all, how do you know that those security tools work? Let's ask people who are doing the DevSecOps. How do you know that that the security tools work? Maybe because we're producing the bottleneck for the delivery, right? And that as well happens. So the question is like, yeah, okay, let's take the popular things for dependency management, like Snyk, White Source, Black Duck. It depends of the choice. They produce the report, and it looks that the security tool work. But what happens next? Where these findings ends up being? In the magic place called backlog, or because it produces the bottleneck, and you suddenly cannot go into the production because yesterday the business asked to introduce the new functionality which is needed for the next great thing, and you just put in the backlog and say, like, at some sprint somewhere we will clean up that, right? But if you still are fixing those findings, how do you know that you progress? So the question is, maybe you are fixing the things what you are introducing again on the next development sprint. Like, okay, we have implemented the proper security controls. Like, for example, we have done the additional protection on authentication. If by any chance you still do your own authentication authorization mechanism in application. And for the next cycle, you have decided, oh, that would be easier if we will remove, for example, that brute force thing. And yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, like, you're trying to find the shortcuts, even if you have fixed some security finding, if it stays in the front of your functionality, you may introduce that security vulnerability again in the same loop. Or some developers, they can repeatedly make the same mistakes. So how do you know that you progress? And actually, how did you choose in the first place to start with dependency management? Just because everyone says that this is the most critical thing, this is where you need to start your DevSecOps, implement the white source or, I don't know, Snyk in your CI/CD pipeline. So what is actually the priority for your organization? What is the weakest points? Maybe it turns out that you are maintaining the old, like, you know, for many years developed application, which even like not into the modern development world. Maybe there are some other security issues. So that leads to the question, like, is the DevSecOps effective at all? And if you start to ask yourself those type of the questions, you may understand that measurements actually help to make security as a priority as well. And there's a hint, because when you go to the management and say we need the next great security tool in our DevSecOps lifecycle, what they ask you first when you try to ask for the budget? They asking reasoning, right? And they asking numbers because they love numbers, right? And that's the reason why you need to do the measurement by saying like, hey, you know what? We have introduced like the dependency management scanning tool, and like for the last 6 months, we have decreased amount of outdated packages, like from 60 to 40. That clearly shows we are progressing, and that's why maybe we, but to fix them, we need additional resource or we need additional tool. So you need to operate with the numbers if you want to make security as a priority. So like at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that the people love the frameworks. They love like the roadmaps. And one of the things when you start to work with the DevSecOps, the same like with the DevOps, one of the things that you may consider is, okay, we need to build our roadmap. How do we progress in DevSecOps? And for that, you try to build your, or use one of those maturity models, which technically saying to you like what is your, you define your final goal, and it helps you to define the steps to achieve that final goal. There are plenty of, again, definitions for the maturity model, but the one is quite good from the Martin Fowler, which technically, like I mentioned, it helps you to assess your current effectiveness, like in this case for DevSecOps, and what type of the capabilities you need to, or the actions you need to do to achieve the next step. And if you look on the maturity model by itself, it takes 5 minutes just to Google it, and you will find a different type of the maturity models. Like the most common ones, like which has these definitions of the beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert. And if you want to, to spend 5 minutes more on the Google, just try to find DevSecOps maturity assessments. You will get plenty of from the commercial companies with 40 questions which will help you to define like, oh, you're on intermediate level when it comes to DevSecOps. And just to get further, this is how officially it gets. This is the definition for the DevSecOps, what apparently they call as a platform from US General Services Administration. So they came out and they said like, yes, we do have the definition for DevSecOps maturity model, and we define it like in 3 levels. Like in the first level, it's more like a cowboy style of applying DevSecOps. Some people are just using some security tools randomly per project basis, and then as they progress, they become in level 2, level 3, and so on. Like I said, people love those type of the frameworks, and we love to have some kind of the structure, right, when we try to achieve something. And if we look deeper, we will find plenty of those maturity models, like from the OWASP, from the Datadog. By the way, the Datadog has this assessment if you want to do. It's called Measure Your DevSecOps Maturity with Datadog Self-Assessment. Even Gartner comes in with the maturity model for DevSecOps. But there is the one huge problem with all of those maturity models. Like I mentioned, there are plenty of them. That's one thing, right? Another thing is they define the last step. Like this is, if you will follow our roadmap, you will achieve like end state with DevSecOps, which is wrong in nature. There's no end state in the security, right? And again, another thing what I mentioned at the beginning, maturity models, they think that you will progress linearly. But once you start to implement the security in the development, especially in the first phases, there is not going to be the linear progress. So relying purely on the maturity models is not the best way, because it still doesn't answer on on those questions which I asked at the beginning. And that's the reason why we just rely on the things that already have been developed, right? Again, if you look from the perspective that the security is just a part of the DevOps, we need just to look what we do in the development, and we do. So we as well already asked the same questions like in the development. Why do we need the metrics, right? Because like if you do the DevOps, are you doing some measurements in the DevOps as well? Are you collecting the KPIs? No. So how it's like then the question again is how do you know that you're quite successful in the development? Because when you develop the product, you need to answer on all of those questions, like are we achieving the goal with that product for our business? Is our service stable? This is what you know as an SLAs, right? But how do you get SLAs? There is a measurement. How do you get the understanding if your service is capable and scalable? Like then, if for example you have developed the one big application and the big event happens, the favorite one, like Black Friday sales, right? And suddenly we cannot open L-shop page, just because everyone tries to buy all this stuff. So how do you measure these things, like if they're capable or scalable? And that's the reason why in the development we measure it as well. And there are the 4 most common key metrics. And this is quite important to remember them, because we will need them as well in the security. So when you do the development, technically speaking, you want to measure the 2 things. The tempo, like how often you deploy, and what is the time, what time it takes to introduce the change from the commit to the production, and then the stability. So if the downtime happens, how fast you're gonna restore, or like how fast you will restore if some failure has been introduced, for example, with the new updates. And of course, what is the change failure rate or the percentage? These are the basic metrics, at least, on which you need to rely when you do the development. So, what do you measure in DevSecOps? The first and the foremost, you need to define what DevSecOps is for your organization. I just showed you one of the definitions of the Gartner, but you need to settle at least in your organization. Is the DevSecOps about introducing the security tools in CI/CD pipelines? Or it's as well like the transformation of people, education, and as such, changing the processes. And then once you have identified that, you will identify your challenges. And like I said, DevSecOps relies heavily on DevOps. And when it comes to the metrics, we need to just look what we have in DevOps. How do we measure in the DevOps? And one of the most popular the most popular metrics are coming specifically from this book, and they call DORA, so DevOps Research and Assessment metrics. And they define the several criteria. These are not direct metrics what you can take and apply, but these are the things what you need, like the concepts, what you need to remember when you develop your metrics. It's like, first, measure at the global level, not on the team level. And this is quite important when it comes to the security. It doesn't matter that one team, like the front-end team, has implemented all the security measures, and they are like quite good on the metrics, where the backend team doesn't care about the security, right? That API calls are not checked towards the authentication, or not protected from the OWASP top 10. So you need to measure at the global level, not on the team level. And you need to measure the outcomes, not the output. And by this, it's not like how much time you have spent on integrating the same security tool in your CI/CD pipeline and reading the report, but it's how much time, or how much time you spend on fixing. But it's more like how many bugs have you fixed, the security bugs. And again, we discussed a lot about the maturity. It's a good thing to use as a compass, but you shouldn't rely and purely focus on the maturity models. And again, don't miss the forest for the trees. And by this we mean, as well mentioned, if you don't prioritize your challenges, you may focus a lot on the implementing the security controls, which doesn't matter for your organization. Like again, you start to focus on fixing, for example, or implementing the SAST tools, like the statistical code analysis tools, and it turns out that you need in the first place to check your dependencies. So these are the principles which comes from the Accelerate book. I'm kind of strongly suggest to look into that. And when you start to define your KPIs or the key performance indicators, like your metrics, just don't fail under the Gotthard's law that when the measure becomes as a target itself. It's like in this example, if you ask people or start to people measure on number of nails made, they will produce the tiny nails, right? And if you will ask them that you're gonna measure them on the weight of the nails, they will produce the heavy nails. So be careful with the definition of your metrics. So how many KPIs I do need? That's another question. How many KPIs, how many metrics do I need? The first question is okay, will that KPI or the metric provide the value for a wide variety of the groups of users or just for the few individuals? So if you suddenly start to measure some, I don't know, if you start to measure, for example, how many security bugs has been fixed, for whom it's going to be useful, for C-level people or for the team as well. Inside, or for example, if you start to measure how many recurring security bugs are in the place, for whom it's going to be more useful? Most probably for the security team, right? Because then they will understand that they need to do something. Maybe somehow help to the development team and say hey, I see you are always having this type of the security issue. Maybe I need to come back to you with the library already developed for you or with the code snippets. So next time when you don't fail under the same thing. And that's again, will your metric inspire the most meaningful change? Is it possible to track in the first place the metric in a meaningful way? And the most important, how much extra work will be created by tracking that metric? Because the two things, the two biggest issues, what I have seen once we started to measure the DevSecOps is if we produce metrics for the metric's sake, people just don't track them. Or if you don't, for example, say there is a responsible person who is taking care for the implementing and measuring those metrics. If there is no responsibility, nobody is going to do this. So you need as well to think what type of the resources you have in the team to align for these metrics. And of course, in the first place, again, once you start to introduce these type of the metrics, you need to remember that what is called another day, another story, the Cobra Effect. And this is actually the real story. Back in the colony in India, Brits just decided that they looked and they realized that there are too many snakes or too many cobras around the Delhi, and they said like, okay, we're gonna pay for the dead snake amount of the money. And when they realized that the cobra farms started to pop up, so people were raising cobras just to get that money. And they ended up like stopping to pay for money, and those cobra farms has been just opened at the end, having more cobras than they had before. And the same goes with the metrics. It's not, you shouldn't create the metrics for the metrics sake. You need really to focus on the metrics which are important for your organization. So they could be just 5, they could be just 6, not more. Since I touched the DevOps, I mentioned that it's quite important on the first place to start to measure your development, because there are the supporting metrics coming from the development to get the full picture. One of them is the application change time. So you need to measure, even if you don't speak about the security, you need to measure and look how much time you take between the code commit and the production deployment of that code. And then you need to look as well on the deployment frequency. So the number of the deployments to the production in the given time frame. What is most important, you shouldn't look on these two metrics as a separate ones. You need to look into the context, because some teams may have the slower pace, but some teams are like, faster in the development. And that's why you need to measure as well how many changes you have in that given time. And actually, the last thing is like how many failures are produced by these changes. Putting together all of these 4 metrics or the KPIs, it will give the picture of your pace, amount of the changes, and the deployment frequency. Once you have that picture, you can align it with your security KPIs. And those are the several ones as an examples. Yeah, and I forgot the last one is as well the test coverage, because we love tests, right? But it's quite important as well to understand what is the state of your regular tests, how well your code is covered by the tests. Once you have all of those 5 metrics, they are the most common KPIs what I have seen and we have used when we started to measure the DevSecOps. And one of them is, so you start with checking again what is your code test coverage from the security perspective. And when you look on the failed security tests, the number of the security findings identified in the code. And you can, see the correlates between the other type of the bugs. Then another KPI is quite good to measure is how much time it takes to fix actually the security bug. This is where, again, you can compare with the regular development KPI and how much time it takes to fix the regular bug, which will give you the understanding, do you need to introduce more training maybe for the developers, or maybe you need to introduce the assigned person in like senior developer who just focuses on the specific security findings and such. Top vulnerability types. This is what I mentioned at the beginning. These 2 things are really useful. If you don't have the resources and timing to measure all other things, I would suggest to start with these ones. It's like, first of all, how many security findings you have, and what type of rules are, what type of the vulnerabilities, and do they repeat? Because this is where if you don't have the security expert in your team, you can go to the security team and say like, hey, we have a top 3 issues all the time popping up. We may need your help, either technically or at least with the educational. Can you come and solve this? Because we see that that gets repeating, so it seems something is not okay. Yes.
I'm sticking my head out, maybe it's a stupid question, but you use the word security tests. And what specifically do you mean by that, especially in the context of code coverage as well? Do you mean tests being run by automated tools, or I mean specifically security tailored unit tests?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for asking that. I mean both. So it's like just unified umbrella of the security unit tests, and as well the if you have implemented the security tools like again the SAST or DAST or dependency management scanning, so you can put this under the umbrella, the same umbrella in this particular. I'm trying to simplify this because the more you become mature in the measuring, if you see that the KPIs work for you, like the measuring, the more granular you can make it, like by the types. Does it help? Thanks. I like interaction, so feel free to interrupt me and ask the questions. And again, the number of failed builds due to the security checks. This is to the question of the bottleneck, right? If the security is your bottleneck. And we need to be positive as well. What I usually suggest, don't focus a lot on the negative KPIs, but focus as well on the positive ones. If you do the regular security audits, like those could be the manual, those could be the penetration test, it depends what type of the security processes you have in the place. Try to measure the rate, how it gets improved over the time. That would help you as well to give some numbers to the C-level people by saying, like, you see, because you gave us the budget, and which is most complicated when you're asking the budget for the education, but because you gave the money for the education, for example, for the last 3-4 months, we were more and more successful when it comes to the security audits and being compliant with all the security requirements, or we are finding less and less bugs. So that's about the theoretical part. If we, like I said, these are not the blueprints. That's just the most common ones. What we have seen, what I did, use and so on. But again, it depends on your specific challenges. You may just address 3 or 4 of them. The question is how, and that's a funny part. Because if you look from the tooling perspective, obviously we're gonna focus on the things that are measurable and what we can get from our tools. And those tools could be the CI/CD pipeline itself, or the security tools inside, or the processes, if we speak about the tests inside. So the most common ones, sources to collect and analyze metrics, are, like I mentioned, those could be the CI/CD pipelines or the build and release tools. So we speak about the Git, GitHub, Azure DevOps, Octopus Deploy, Jenkins, and so on. Those are kind of the most popular. Then as well, the security tools itself, they produce the reports, right? And then if you are into the configuration management tools, I would suggest to look into that. And test automation tools, if you're using Selenium or the one of them. So as you can see, it's you have plenty of the sources, which is on one side is nice, on another side introduces the biggest challenge. What I have seen so far is that commercial solutions are out of the scope for several reasons. First, it's quite hard to find a commercial solution which can cover that variety of the tools independently. You most probably gonna see more that bits and pieces are implemented in these tools, especially when it comes to the security tools. They say we do provide as well the metrics, we do provide the monitoring. That's one issue. Another issue that not all of those tools give the data which is needed for your metrics. So if you look, for example, on the particular APIs from the GitHub, you may not find some some particular event what you are interested, or Jenkins, it doesn't matter. So they don't have kind of, you don't get the unified way of collecting that data. And that's the reason why, like for the last 2 years, I haven't found a good commercial solution which could be independent platform where I could say like, okay, I'm in my organization, I'm using the GitHub, I'm using, I don't know, the white source, and I'm using Selenium. Can you just grab all the logs from there and like, you know, structurize and get me KPIs out? That's one challenge. Another challenge is like how homogeneous environment is in your organization. It's like the bigger organization gets, the more you will see, like some teams are using the Jenkins, some teams are using GitLab, some teams are using GitHub. If it's not your case, you are more lucky because you can just focus on what you have in the house and you can develop your own solution. And the way how you can do, and this is what we did, in our case, we had like, you know, the Azure DevOps, the white source stuff, and we just took all that data and pushed into the Power BI, as simple as it can be. It requires some work, but it pays off over the time because like in this particular case, if you do have in Power BI, the management level can just look and see they love numbers, right? And it becomes more understandable. Even for the product owner, it becomes more understandable, not speaking about the security teams where you can give the reports. But the problem, again, is that that's something what you need to work on. That. Thinking like just to summarize, speaking about that solution, if all goes good, I may open source it like in a few months, but let's see. At least it's supporting us for now the Azure DevOps and some basic like the white source code and that thing. Speaking about all of these, metrics are not perfect. These are just numbers. And these numbers, they are not having any, like, you know, like meaning without the proper human interpretation, because they don't give you any guidance if you haven't agreed what is important for you and why you're doing it. So what is the DevSecOps in your team and why do you want to measure and what exactly you want to measure? So it's quite important to focus on the proper KPIs, on the proper metrics, and they will never be a set of the correct KPIs. I gave some examples. If you take them as one-to-one, maybe they will be useful for you. Maybe not all of them are going to be useful for you. So you need to choose some KPIs what is called as a SMART. But they are measurable, that they are countable and they are reasonable, right? And in the time. I do usually suggest like choose 5 or the 6 metrics to start with. And the most important, define who owns those KPIs. Because when it comes to the responsibility, everyone's responsibility, no one's responsibility, right? So you need at least to look and agree in the team, like if you start in the team size, that there is a person has like, 20% of the time, at least at the beginning, to define the KPIs and maintain them over the time. If you got lucky and you already do some measurements in the DevOps, what we have, I have seen like especially the product owners, they are obsessed with those type of the things. You may ask their help or may even like incorporate them and just extend with the security KPIs, because again, you need to have the full picture. You need as well to measure the regular things when it comes to development to compare with the security picture. And like I said, build reporting on the top of the use technology. That's not only because of shortage on the market Like market doesn't give us a quite good solution, which is quite strange that that marketplace is still empty after the 3-4 years of high demand. But another reason is buying is easy, wasting the money is easy on some security tools, but implementing them is harder. So that's you need to focus on the concepts first. You need to focus on understanding if that's gonna work for you, if those metrics are gonna work for you, if the process is gonna work for you. So, like I said, the first and the foremost thing what you can do is just to define what DevSecOps means for your specific organization. Because ad hoc, I can give you at least 6 definitions of the DevSecOps what I have seen across the market. Not speaking like in reality if you start to speak with different companies. And then once you have understood what is DevSecOps in your particular organization, just look what are the security challenges when it comes to the development. This will help you to define the KPIs in the smart way. Don't start with the huge list, limit with the 5-6, and try to leverage already used solutions to build and collect and report. So with that call for action, I will pause here and I will be happy to answer on the questions if there are some, or you can ask as well after. Thank you for your time.